It's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Sean O'Reilly, who is the director of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation, an umbrella organization covering various professions within the conservation for buildings, and it's quite a unique organization. So that's why I was very keen in bringing it here, because although the remit is UK, I keep saying go global because I think there are things there from the recognition of courses to the professional accreditation, and all based in competence. So they have set up also in the ICOMOS principles and other, but these areas of competence, which is what someone requires to be in architectural conservation. So I'll leave you with.
Thank you very much, Christina. It's all working okay. If people are in the waiting room, just interrupt me and let them in or whatever. Yeah. Oh, you'll do that. Oh, very good. Oh, well, hello, everyone. Hello, Dad's Line 2. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. As Christina said, it was to talk a bit about the IHBC, the Institute of Historic Building Conservation, of which I'm the director. And okay, thank you. So it's probably me breaking the whole thing down. But anyway, yes, IHBC, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. So I think that shows me we must be doing something right. We do a lot of the kind of services you see here for our members in the, primarily, but not exclusively, the UK, from job adverts where we advertise posts for people coming from the range of professions that are encompassed within our membership, which ranges from archaeology right across to architects and surveyors, quality assured businesses, the HESPER practice you see there, the news service, the news blog, and the recognition of CPD providers, and of course conservation courses, of which Christine Strathclyde is one. We offer online support like self-starters that you see at the top. We have a wiki that we focus on reaching to construction sector professionals through a online designing buildings wiki. And we also have the CPP APPG, which you see the box of there. And that's an all-party parliamentary group, so that we engage directly with MPs in Westminster and advocate on behalf, as the Secretariat, of the issues around conservation and places and people in those terms. Now I'm going to talk about a range of the issues that we face in terms of how we operate as a single professional body that encompasses all of the professions, but also builds very much on the criteria of the 1993 guidelines that we've been hearing so much about. So I'll be looking at the kind of things that we do, the skills, services that we encompass, the training. I'll just let them in, is that right? Yeah, okay. The training and then I'll look at how IHBC accreditation works. It's a single model, a single standard that we have for all the breadth professional disciplines encompassed within our membership. Then future careers, the kind of support we give, and also I kind of taste the value of what we do. The people who are here today online, if you haven't been a member of the IHBC before, first time membership of 1 year free taster memberships to get an idea of the kind of service that we offer, so that if you want to sign up on the form, and we'll send out the details of that, I hope, with the post-event literature, you can just sign up online there, so you've been along at this event and you get a free membership for a year, and that applies to people attending online too. Fundamentally, we do all the things that professional bodies do, but fundamental, of course, are ethics and standards, a consistent basis, a consistent presence, and absolutely central there is the idea from our point of view of how you practice, because we're very much rooted in the practitioner end of conservation and how it can actually be delivered. The fundamental document at our end is the CPPP, as it's described there, the Conservation Professional Practice Principles. And that is our base standard for describing at a place level what we see conservation as having to do and what its standards should be. But all of this stuff relies on partnership, on working with other bodies, and the recognition from other bodies that see us as being a credible representative of these standards that we're talking about here. So for the CPP, the Conservation Professional Practice Principles, we've written that as ourselves jointly with CV, which is Civic Voice, which is the community interest, and the Historic Towns and Villages Forum, HTVF, which is a membership body that reaches across from planners and local authorities, right to community bodies. And that, as I say, is our core standard. Quality assurance, the BS 7913 is the Guide to the Conservation of Historic Buildings, absolutely core guidance for practice in particularly the construction sector, but also the conservation sector, which we produced in conjunction with BSI, a copy that was at a better value than if you bought them singly from BSI. So we branded the that offered branded versions at a cheaper rate to our members there. Historic England, of course, talking about our business listing, Hesper, which is a range of now nearly 50 service providers that offer conservation related services that are quality assured in a relatively light touch mechanism by the IHBC. And of course, the ICOMOS framework that it's been great to hear so much positive sound about, because as you'll hear later as well, so much of the conservation standards in the UK are built around those 1993 guidelines, precisely because of the practical framework within which they exist. Kind of support and CPD and skills that we offer. They range across from events to publications, a lot of online stuff, because we need to reach a fairly thinly spread membership across the UK and beyond, with particular tools and resources, including what we call the toolbox, which is a range of online tools, including research notes and papers and guidance and resources like that. You see the conservation wiki below that, but also the self-starter, which is a kind of a kickstart for people who are introducing their careers into conservation, where they can have an online piece of guidance, a quick guidance to conservation, and it highlights through a series of links and things how you might be welcomed, how you gain experience, particularly relevant these days, of course, is the online networking. You click on these tabs on the web, and it'll bring you to web pages that will give you a kind of a postgrad student level of introduction, or an engaged non-professional level of interest in them, and links. Standards and duties we've touched on, but also very importantly to volunteers and careers, because we see the voluntary element in building up skill sets as absolutely critical for developing effective competence in conservation, because you won't get the full breadth of skills in any single professional job. You will always need to build out those skills from there, particularly if you're looking at the idea of conservation skills and professional competence as it is assessed by the IHBC. The kind of assessments that we do, well, there's a no assessment situation where you have a supporter who comes in and is just interested in the kind of things we do, so that open level. We have a light touch assess system that's equivalent to a apprentice level, or a postgrad student, or a graduated student in conservation, and then and that's affiliate, so that's assessed. And then we've two accredited levels, the associate, which involves a reaccreditation, or a full member, which is fully accredited in interdisciplinary practice, which doesn't require reaccreditation. And I'll come back to explaining the rationale behind those in a few minutes as well. All levels have the same fee. all of them require the same standards of offer the same benefits, and then there's no assessment charge. So if you're applying for accreditation, we don't ask any assessment on that. It's all through a voluntary network of people from a range of different professional backgrounds. And the application, as we'll see, your application is about demonstrating through reflection your skills, knowledge, and experience across the range of skill sets that we deal with. This pie diagram is from about 2015. We've grown substantially since then in terms of our members, but you will see from that there's a wide range of membership encompassed within our I'll do that again, shall I just let them in? Within our membership, from people who increasingly now are just IHBC with other professional backgrounds, but also you can see there we have archaeologists, engineers, surveyors, architects, and we use a single standard for the assessment and the accreditation of people coming from these backgrounds, of which town planners are the most substantial body, because the origins of the IHBC are within the local conservation officer legacy and tradition in the UK, and it is that context that really gave us the foundation for the model that we would use as a single model for assessment of conservation standards and what conservation is. And this is our conservation cycle model, and the areas of competence that you see there: professional evaluation, management, and intervention. And what we see this is a cycle that is a cycle first and foremost, so that it goes around again and again. You don't just finish conservation and walk away from it. You keep evaluating. You see the impacts of the actions, decision, advice that you've undertaken. And that in itself is a process. And that process then involves a continual process where there is a professional standard of conservation overseeing all the elements within that conservation cycle and conservation process. But absolutely critical is that there is a sequence there, as identified in the other three professional areas of competence. The evaluation, so you look at what you're working with, you begin to try to understand it as best you can, proportionately. Management, where you're caring for it or looking after it. So you can't care for something if you haven't looked at it or tried to understand it. And then after caring for it, and when you have that some of that in place, and obviously these all overlap, then you intervene, you offer your intervention into it, or you decide not to intervene. And the critical thing is, for defining what conservation is from our point of view in our model, and this is just the model we use, if you do intervention or if you undertake management before you've actually evaluated to a proportionate level what you're working with, it's not conservation. That's the rationale we have it. So all the other issues around it are subordinate to the fact that the process, the sequence, must entail that change and involvement. Now, those are the areas of competence. Where do they come from, and where does this cycle come from? Well, the IHBC was founded in 1997, formerly conservation officers, very involved in local authority planning and activating the legislation that had evolved substantially until then. And when the Association of Conservation Officers, as they were, wanted to change to become a professional body, they produced a list of what are indicated there of the IHBC competences. And those competences were a sequence in no particular order. Historically, they appeared in different orders of very clear and comprehensible sort of aspects of conservation practice. You see things like, as well as philosophy and practice, things like history, research, legislation, finance and economics, so that you're working through the finances. Project management was a big part of that, design and presentation, and technology. So that was just a list of things, and when you applied, you had to make your case to say that you know enough about all of those competences overall. You didn't have to know everything about everyone. We were accused of requiring God to be able to fill out the forms, because that was the only person who would know all of these things to an adequate level, but it wasn't around that side at all. On the areas of competence, We then built around the competences themselves a sequence of competences, these into a new order that you see there, and then the areas of competences of professional, which is the overarching one that we saw in our conservation cycle, and the three practical ones: evaluation, management, and intervention. Professional sits over all, and the three practical areas of competence sit around underneath those and within those. The professional relates to philosophy and practice. So if you're going to be a professional advisor in these areas, you have to have a philosophy. It doesn't have to be a single philosophy, it's your philosophy, and your practice knowledge and practice understanding. Then for evaluation, you needed to know about history, research, recording, and analysis, and make your case around that. Management, need to show you know about legislation and policy, finance and economics, and intervention at the change point, design, presentation, which is about communication with the stakeholders, and technology, the material side to these processes. And for my bit of magic, let's hope this works, my magic transition from here into the conservation cycle is that all those different areas relate to areas within the conservation cycle. So you have the competences, which equate to history, research and recording and evaluate and analysis, which relate to evaluation, and correspondingly across there. So those competences sit within the broader generic areas of competence. We manage the generic areas of competence as the conservation cycle. It needs a bit of thinking to get there, but everyone understands the competences. You know, what's legislation? We know that, but it builds up into this single model that has this sequence that we require. So we acquire people when they're applying for accreditation to show different levels of knowledge and competence around this conservation cycle as it's represented there. And those areas of competence break down into those practical areas of competence as well. The evaluation, where they link to specific disciplines, evaluation, you've got history and research, so people coming from those disciplines know they'll feel more comfortable in these areas. Survey, archaeology fits there. Right across to the other end, intervention, architecture, projects, they link across to specific disciplines, but they are not those specific disciplines. They're general areas of practice around those disciplines. And similarly with management, it's about planning, evaluation, it's about understanding, intervention, architecture, construction sort of issues. So actually the model reflects generic activities as much as anything else. And you can see some of those generic activities listed there. Again, sitting within it, but they range from generic professional ones like working around standards and ethics and those levels, to the evaluation, where your interpretation, your investigation, your appreciation or critical elements, sustainability and planning for management, and of course then change, enhancement, improvement, and development as well. All those difficult words, you know, still just sit within that process of conservation because it is around engaging with those wider fora. The areas of the cycle, the areas of conservation, the areas of competence and the competences themselves all sit within and upon the 1993 ICOMOS guidelines criteria. And that's what you see as my own sort of little mapping across from the various criteria to the different parts of the conservation cycle. So you can do a mapping across there that you don't need to read it there, but it makes sense and it accounts for overlapping. But equally, it can pull out some holes and some gaps as well within those areas, or maybe sort of some changes of emphasis as well, which is could be the subject for a separate sort of study in a way. So we won't worry about that, but we will worry about, you know, is this just too generic? Is it losing the practice focus? Because you have the focus into the competences and it brings you up to the generic practice areas, it means that anyone can have access to these systems. They may need to build out their skills, but they can have access to it. So we work with the Church of England, for example, quite a lot in training their advisory officers, the secretaries to what are called diocesan advisory committees. And they come in at kind of high-level administrative sort of posts, but also with the strong conservation role that equates a lot of the time to the conservation officer in the UK. And they feel like, oh, well, I can't be IHBC because I deal primarily with churches, and that's my main sort of involvement. But because we move from the practicality of this Welsh chapel sort of restoration and rescue, because we move from those practicalities and specifics through our conservation cycle into the generics, that means they can find a home with us just as easily as someone who's coming from an urban conservation officer sort of role, or someone working on, as we had queries about previously, Scottish Island, and wondering where they fit in within those processes. Now the conservation cycle, then I can zoom through the rest because you're absolutely embedded in the conservation cycle concept at the moment. It shapes and supports all that we do in terms of how we do accreditation. We look at capability through the different levels. We look for people to be capable within conservation practice, and we assess them in those terms. And also our different other services and activities, including HESPER, the membership service providers things, the other things that you saw at the start there. We engage with the conservation cycle in those terms. And of course, course recognition, which we mentioned before as well. When we assess a course for IHBC full recognition, a conservation course, such as we assess the course content, the mandatory content in the course, and we evaluate it, looking at modules, looking at scoring those modules, assessing them, and then giving a final decision on whether this fits within the IHBC's model or not. It also relates to our conservation accreditation standards. So a full member of the IHBC, which is the kind of lifelong top level of membership, must have a professional competence, demonstrate capability within the professional area of competence, and at least 2 of the practical areas of competence: evaluation, management, or intervention. And if you're able to demonstrate your competence across those 2 generic areas of competence, you are in effect, as we would take it, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary in terms of the 1993 ICOMOS guidelines. You're working in 2 distinct generic areas of practical conservation, so you have proven yourself in terms of that practice. If you're an associate, which is the step down, you're accredited within a single area of professional area of competence, so that you would be professional. You have to do that, and then you just demonstrate competence in any one of the 3 practical areas of competence: evaluation, management, or intervention. And these usually reflect your natural professional background, your historic professional background. So planners would tend to, for example, that sort of sequence would work across there. So conservation cycle, again, and that. When we're doing our assessment, we have a very intimidating big form, because it's a form that's actually written for people coming from all these different disciplines. So all of these people have to understand it. So we do say stuff that is a bit long-winded at times, precisely because people are coming in with different professional backgrounds, presumptions, understandings of even words like conservation. Christina mentioned earlier, you know, how we get confused by the words. Well, we have an awful lot of words there because we're trying to move beyond where people are making presumptions from the professional background to where they're understanding what we're trying to have people say. So you can do your background. We talk in the form. We talk in the form about how we assess skills, how we have the different areas and levels of assessment. Very simple as well, all very basic of advice. Be sure to type your form, not to handwrite it, which is a sort of a legacy thing as well. And then you put in your testimonial, which is a statement of how you think you understand these different areas of competence actually work. And then coming into the conclusion, the reasons to join, we are a different body. The distinction is because we're fundamentally interdisciplinary by nature, it's quite difficult for bureaucracies and the likes of that. Like there's a thing called the standard occupational classification in the UK that can't deal with that perfectly. It is trying to address it at the moment. But it doesn't mean we're kind of as reckoned in things like Heritage Lottery Fund as we would like to be because of this interdisciplinary sort of focus. However, we think these standards are very specific to the 21st century. The framework for them is absolutely international in terms of its credibility. We've got the ICOMOS on one side. We also have a project management model for our parallel from the World Bank for our conservation cycle, and we have then the assessment models informed CPD support, and of course a local network of branches too, and the various support for the different areas of practice. The end of this is just tasters talking about the opportunities that you have there, the kind of things that we offer, including the benefits. In the UK, you get tax relief on your submissions, but on your fees. But what we do say very strongly is that fees aren't the barrier. If you're on low wage, you can make applications. We can give up to 100% fee relief on these as well. And that's really probably me. Am I too long? Am I okay? Time-wise, okay.
It's really this model, the HBC model is really the existence in the sequence is so critical again, no? Because people, a sum of elements, you don't put in the right order. So it's logic, it's mathematics. You don't have the same result, and people still don't get it, and that's why people do very randomly sometimes a course of this thing here, and then they go and do and it's just. Doesn't work. You have to really do it in a particular sequence that at the end there is a learning, because that's what it's all about. No? If you don't have the fundamentals of something, it's just no, even if you go to a course, you're not going to understand it. So it's, and I was thinking actually as you were presenting that you're like a small university in a way, because all these areas that you cover is, you see our website is not very different to your website.
Our website isn't the there's 30,000 pages.
And what you have already is the critical, I think, aspect there. So it's really complex. The students can give testimony of that. The first times I tell them, look at IHBC page, because everything you can think of is going to be there. So yes, what they are looking about about conservation, and it's always updated, because one of the problems, including myself, is websites are not updated many times. So I don't know how they do it. It's by art of magic, because but it's really updated always. So thanks so much for that.
Let's take any questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions for Sean, but as I say, will be opportunities to talk